Then the author mentions وتجوز إمامة الأعمى والمخالف في الفروع والعينين والمجذم إلا أن يشتد جذامه ويضر بمن خلفه فينحى عنه. Then the author is going to mention some of the things that are permissible, or some of the an imam that is permissible to pray behind. And the only reason why he's mentioning this is to make sure that it's clear that such and such a person would not be disliked to pray behind nor prohibited from praying behind. So he mentions what tujuzi imamatul a'ma, meaning a blind person. A person might assume that a person being blind might mean that praying behind him is disliked or prohibited. So he makes that clarification by saying what tujuzu imamatul a'ma. And then he says wal mukhalifi fil furu'. Wal mukhalifa fil furu', meaning people, meaning the different imams. That's what mukhalifa lil furu' means, meaning that they're not mukhalif fil usul, meaning that they don't have a different usul, meaning we're talking about the branches of fiqh. So for example, the example that they give in the books, in terms of the Malikiyah, kissing one's wife on the mouth would break the prayer. But in the Hanafi school, it wouldn't. So if, technically speaking, we saw a Hanafi imam kiss his wife and then make his takbir, we could pray behind them. It would be sound. Or, for example, Shafi'i, for them it's permissible. They would have a sound wudu even if they were to wipe over a little bit of the head. Whereas in the Maliki school, it is obligatory for us to wipe over the whole head. But even if they were to only wipe over a piece of the head, then it would be permissible for us to pray behind them, because what we're going to look at is the soundness of the Imam school. So for example, as long as something is sound in the Imam school, then it is fine for us, because all that matters for us is that according to the other school, that such and such a person has wudu, for example. So that Imam, technically speaking, is in the state of wudu, and so there's no problem, absolutely no problem at all, praying behind an Imam from another valid school. وَالْعِينِينَ, and al-'inina is a person that has a small genital. وَالْمُجَذَّمِ is a person who has the disease of leprosy. إِلَّا أَنْ يَشْتَدَّ جُذَامُهُ, so it is permissible for a person even who has leprosy to be an imam, except under the condition that it is not a serious case of leprosy. That's why it says إِلَّا أَنْ يَشْتَدَّ جُذَامُهُ وَيَدُرُ بِمَنْ خَلْفَهُ, and it harms the person who's behind them. What do they mean by harms the person who's behind him? It would disturb the person who's behind them, because a person who has a severe case of leprosy, a very staunch scent comes out from their body. So he says بِمَنْ خَلْفَهُ فَيُنَحَّ عَنْهُمْ, and so he should be kept away from them. Or if the prayer was in the masjid, then he should avoid the congregation because of the distraction and the disturbance that it causes to the congregation. So in that case, he would be excused from praying in congregation. Then it says وَيَجُوزُ عُلُوُ الْمَأْمُومِ عَلَى إِمَامِهِ وَلَوْ بِسَطْحٍ وَلَا يَجُوزُ لِلْإِمَامِ الْعُلُوُ عَلَى مَأْمُومِهِ إِلَّا بِشَيْءٍ يَسِيرٍ. Then he mentions وَيَجُوزُ عُلُوُ الْمَأْمُومِ. Here he's going to talk about the mas'ala of the imam being on top of the followers, or the followers being on top of the imam. The first mas'ala that he's going to start with is the followers being on top of the imam. For example, praying on a second floor or praying on a stage. So the imam is on the ground where the people behind him are praying on the stage. He says وَيُجُوزُ عُلُوُ الْمَأْمُومِ عَلَى إِمَامِهِ وَلَوْ بِسَطْحٍ. He says that it's permissible for the ma'mum to pray on a surface above the imam, even if it's on a roof. So technically speaking, if the imam is on the floor, then it is still permissible for people to pray on a roof, which in our times, realistically speaking, this mas'ala is related to praying on different floors. So if the imam was on the first floor, it would be sound for us to pray on the second floor. وَلَا يَجُوزُ لِلْإِمَامِ الْعُلُوُ عَلَى مَأْمُومِهِ إِلَّا بِشَيْءٍ يَسِيرٍ, and it is not permissible for the imam to be above the ma'mumeen إِلَّا بِشَيْءٍ يَسِيرٍ, except only a small distance. a small measure. Kashibri. The shibri wa nahwihi. A shibri is the measure that if a person were to hold his thumb out and his index finger up so that it makes the shape like an L, then the space between the thumb and the index finger trailing through the air was the size of a shibr. So if you were to take your finger and put it out, the index finger to put it straight up, and then take the thumb out and put it sideways, and then place these two fingers on the ground, that is what we call a shibr. And that's what he's talking, that it is permissible for the imam to be that much over the ma'mumin and nothing higher than that. And then he says, وَإِنْ قَصَدَ الْإِمَامُ أَوْ الْمَأْمُومُ بِالْعُلُوِهِ الْكِبْرَ بَطَلَ الصَّلَاةُ. And he says, if any of the two, whether it is the ma'mum that are above the imam or the imam that is above the followers, then if being above, if he had the intention of kibr, of pride, then his prayer would become invalid. Now this mas'ala that he's talking about, a person might say, then are the prayers of a person sound if they pray above the imam? For example, in masjids where the congregation is 2 floors. So for example, in some cases where the imam is on the second floor and the followers are in the basement. When there's necessity, meaning it's not done intentionally, then the prayer of the imam and everybody else would be sound according to the Maliki school, because what he's talking about here is obviously when there's no necessity. So technically speaking, the root of the mas'ala, although he says it's la yajuzu, the prayer would still be sound under all circumstances, but a person would be doing something contrary to what is sound. Now, the area where the prayer becomes invalid is when there's kibr, is when a person, by being higher than the others, is intending pride for being over the people. But when there is no pride, then the prayer is still sound. So the meaning here when he says la yajuzu, it's not permissible, but not every time does when we say that it's not permissible, does it mean that it automatically means that the prayer is not sound. That's why he clarifies that it becomes invalid وَإِنْ قَصَدَ الْإِمَامُ الْمَأْمُومُ بِعُلُوهِ الْكِبْرَ. If he intends al-kibra, pride, batala salatu. So that's where his prayer will become not sound. So technically speaking, if a person were to pray on the basement floor and the imam was on the second floor and there was room on the second floor, but he decided to pray on the first floor, he would be doing something that's not yajuz, but his prayer would still be sound. Now, if he was praying on if the imam was on the second floor and the second floor was completely packed, and he prayed under the imam on the first floor, then in this case he's only praying there under necessity, so he wouldn't be considered doing something contrary because he's only praying there out of necessity. Then he mentions وَمِن شُرُوطِ الْمَأْمُومِ أَنْ يَنْوِيَ الْإِقْتِدَاءَ بِإِمَامِهِ. He says, and now he's going to mention to you some of the conditions of the follower. What does the follower? We just mentioned the conditions of the imam. What are the conditions of the follower? The conditions of the follower, and yanwi al-iqtida, that he has the attention that he's following the imam, but it's important that we add to the text, are mentioned fi awwal salatihi. The meaning of this mas'ala is that a person who is following the imam must have that intention from the beginning of the prayer. This mas'ala, what they're referring to here, is to rule out a person who entered the prayer by himself, for example. And then, for example, a person was entered the prayer by himself and then a congregation began beside him. He cannot make a niyyah now and say, I intend to follow the congregation. So in order to follow the imam, he has to follow the imam from the beginning of his own prayer. Meaning again, that he cannot say Allahu Akbar into the prayer on his own, and then all of a sudden a congregation comes into the mosques and starts praying, he cannot just say, okay, you know what, I'm going to intend to join this prayer although I'm in my own prayer. So that's why he says, and yanwi al-iqtida bi imami, he has to have the intention from the beginning of his prayer, and he cannot do it during his own prayer. Then he says, وَلَا يُشْتَرَطُ فِي حَقِّ الْإِمَامِ أن ينوي الإمامة إلا في 4 مسائل في صلاة الجمعة وصلاة الجمع وصلاة الخوف وصلاة الاستخلاف. Now he's going to mention another mas'ala, that in some cases it's obligatory for the imam to intend that he's the imam, and in some cases he's not. The general rule is whatever prayer cannot be prayed without an imam, then the imam must have the intention that he's the imam. In those prayers that can be prayed without an imam, then he doesn't have to intend to be the imam. For example, the 5 daily prayers, technically speaking, can be prayed without an imam, because a person can pray individually and his prayer would be sound. It's not, although it's better for him to have the intention, it's not obligatory. But the prayers in which he mentions here, number 1, Jum'ah. Jum'ah cannot be prayed without an imam. For example, a person cannot pray Jum'ah at home without an imam. If he misses Jum'ah, he has to pray Dhuhr. Was Salat al-Jam'i. Salat al-Jam'i, under the condition when a person can join Maghrib and Isha because of certain weather conditions, then he can pray. The imam has to have the intention that he's an imam, because that prayer cannot be prayed without an imam. The 3rd prayer was Salat al-Khawf. Salat al-Khawf is the prayer that they make during jihad. When they're doing a certain jama' in jihad, that jam has to be done with an imam, and it cannot be done alone. Was Salat al-Khawf. And then he mentions was Salat al-Istikhlaf. Was Salat al-Istikhlaf is also something that has to be prayed with an imam. What does he mean by Salat al-Istikhlaf? If the imam was praying, the original imam, and then he broke his wudu involuntarily, then he's going to grab something from someone from behind and make them the imam. That person has to now make the intention that he's the imam before he makes any next move. So for example, if the imam breaks his wudu during ruku', the imam is going to stand up, but he's not going to say Allahu Akbar because he doesn't want the people to move. He's going to grab a guy from behind him who's already in ruku' and drag him to the front. Before that new imam who's already in ruku' says Allahu Akbar to come back to the standing position, he has to have the niyyah of being the imam. So these are the 4 areas in fiqh where a person being the imam has to have, it's obligatory for him to have the intention, or it's a necessary condition in order for the prayer, for the people to be behind him, for their prayers to be sound. Then some of the ulama zada, and he says, وَزَادَ بَعْدُهُمْ فَضْلُ الْجَمَاعَةِ عَلَى الْخِلَافِ فِي ذَلِكَ. So here he's going to here he mentions that some of the ulama mentioned that in order for the imam in any prayer to get the reward of the jama'ah, he has to have the intention. So that's why he says وَزَادَ بَعْدُهُمْ أي بعض العلماء فضل الجماعة, meaning that in order to get the fadl of jama'ah, to get the reward of praying the jama'ah, the imam has to have the intention that he's the imam. And he says على الخلاف في ذلك, and there's a difference of opinion in regards to that, and so the safer route is to observe that issue in order to remove oneself from the contrary of a khilaf and erring on the side of caution.